You're listening to Innovating Tomorrow's Medicine with Dr. Jeff Trickett.
In this episode, I'm speaking with Stanley Lewis, with over 25 years of experience in clinical research, drug development, and patient care. Prior roles include CMO at Anson Biopharma, helping to raise a $100 million Series B, and TaiMed Biologics securing FDA approval of Trogarzo. Currently founder and CEO at A28 Therapeutics. What is one of the most impactful lessons you've learned throughout your career in biotech, and how has it shaped your leadership approach?
The lesson that I learned was keep that focus. You may be the only person in the room who can really advocate for patients.
What role does storytelling play in fundraising, and how do you effectively communicate your company's vision and mission to potential investors?
Well, our company's vision is a world where we don't fear cancer or its treatments.
If you tick all three of those pillars, then your chance of a successfully marketed drug is that much higher. What role does strategic networking play in fundraising, and how do you go about cultivating a network of potential investors or partners?
Preparation is to performance, as circulation is to luck. That means you got to get out there and network.
Stan, welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad I could be here today.
Thanks for taking the time to speak with me. So let's dive in. So tell me about A28 Therapeutics, the inspiration behind it, and why it's personal to you.
So A28 Therapeutics is a clinical stage biotechnology company. We're developing targeted lytic peptides for treatment of cancer. And it's really a special journey for me because my father died of gastric cancer when I was in medical school. And in many ways, he was an inspiration to me, and one of the reasons why I became a physician. Probably the biggest reason why I became a physician. And so when he was diagnosed with gastric cancer that had metastasized to his liver, I was devastated. And I knew that all he wanted to do was to see me become a physician. So part of the drive behind why I am a doctor, as well as why I went into drug development, was to be able to strike a blow against this terrible disease that had took my father.
Thank you for sharing. That's a really powerful story. So how do you evaluate the scientific and clinical merit of new ideas and projects within A28?
It's probably easier to say that the projects that I give myself to sort of find me. I hear the story, the molecule is interesting for whatever reason, and it has to meet sort of three criteria that I use whenever I decide I'm going to devote my time to developing a project. The first is, I took my Hippocratic Oath very seriously. First, do no harm. So I have to see that the drug is going to be safe. It's going to have a tolerability profile that I would consider reasonable relative to the disease and unlikely to greatly diminish the patient's quality of life. Don't get me wrong, I realize that some medicines are going to be toxic. I realize that at this stage in certain diseases that there are certain sort of givens within the drug development and this world. But for me personally, it's very important that the drugs that I develop and I devote my time to are very tolerable. The second thing is I believe that nature gives us a lot of clues. If we look at nature and we think about, how this molecule or how this intervention is going to interact with the body, think about how the body naturally works. Think about the physiology. How much will this intervention disrupt the normal physiology of the body? Think about how the body would want to clear this disease, what's gone wrong that has created this condition. And then think about going backwards toward a physiologic or a healthy sort of phenotype. And then the final thing that really, really helps me decide what I'm going to develop is, well, Jeff, you know I'm from Texas, right? So I go by the principle, keep it simple, stupid, sort of the KISS principle, right? I really believe that the most simple solution is probably the better solution. It's unlikely to cause as many off-target or side effects. And simple solutions tend to have be less disruptive in general. I think our industry has probably gotten too obsessed with that which is complex and too cool for school. So I tend to favor those projects, those interventions that are really simple.
The next question I wanted to ask you, which I think you perhaps part answered with what you just said, but how does A28 incorporate patient feedback and real world evidence into the development of new treatments?
Well, you know, Jeff, I could really just sort of go back to my dad, but it's true for probably anyone who's had cancer or had a family member that had to undergo treatment for cancer. Those drugs are really difficult to take. But your choice is either take them and, you know, get whatever benefits they may have toward lengthening your life, or don't take them and succumb to your disease. It's a really tough dilemma for patients. But for me, when I think about what patients want, I think patients want a balance. I think they want, you know, they want to be able to live a good quality life, and they're willing to put up with some side effects if they have to, but none to the point that they literally make the decision, you know, every day, would I rather die or would I rather take this? You know, I just don't believe that it should be that dire a decision, sort of no pun intended, but there shouldn't be that dire a decision. It should be an easy decision to say, okay, I'm taking this medication and it's going to improve my health. That's how I want folks to feel.
Having worked together, I think you're going to like the next question. So what role does AI and machine learning play in your research and development processes at A28?
A28, the product that we acquired was fairly old. It's a relatively old molecule itself, and it's based on a sort of an old principle from antibiotics. It's a lytic peptide. Now it's been modified and sort of retooled to be able to treat cancer, but at the end of the day, it's a lot like the same way we treat bacteria. And so AI sort of came along after our molecule already existed, had already been in patients, and we'd already have a really good idea about what it could do, how it could do that, etc. So we didn't need that part of AI that is sort of learning the molecule, learning the biology, and then trying to create molecules that'll intervene with that biology. Our molecule was already pretty much made. However, I have engaged with AI companies to think about ways we might modify this molecule. We could, you know, sort of reverse engineer some of the potential reasons why the molecule causes side effects, and maybe even ways to improve upon its efficacy. So one of the things, though, that we've actually done is we've actually contracted with an AI company to take all of the information that they know about our molecule, about our target, about the disease, etc., look at our next planned clinical trial, and predict whether that clinical trial would be successful. And I'm pleased to say that prediction that we would most likely be very successful in our next trial.
I think you're being modest now. You had a very favorable outcome.
Yeah, actually, we feel really good about this new and innovative medication and how it will impact the cancer world. And that AI assessment sort of confirms what we believed all along.
I think that's right. And I think, AI it is another tool that we have in our armory. And I think, as with all things, it's about really using, not solely relying on, but it's an additional tool to help us sort of like make decisions. So I think we're going to see more and more of this for sure.
Well, we better get comfortable with it because it's definitely here. And I think that understanding, sort of all of the ramifications of it can be a little bit daunting. Sometimes I hear new things that are really scary about, oh my God, it could do that. But I think it's important for us to recognize that relationship, that it is a tool and that we can use it to make ourselves better, to make our work more efficient. And those things I do welcome.
Next question. What is one of the most impactful lessons you've learned throughout your career in biotech, and how has it shaped your leadership approach?
Most impactful lessons?
Yes.
Oh my God. Every day, Jeff, is a lesson and an opportunity, to learn. Yeah, I think, once again, I would go back to what is, sort of my North Star. What is the thing that sort of guides my desire to work in this field? And at the end of the day, I know it may sound trite to say, but I still focus on patients, man. I really want to make patients, feel better and reduce suffering. So, one of the lessons I've learned is just never get away from that. Never lose sight of the patient. And I know when I sort of transitioned from direct patient care into drug development, some of my old colleagues kind of said, oh no, he's going over to the dark side. And, and for whatever reasons that people think that you may go into drug development, I don't think that's really what guided me. I mean, I think the thing that probably guided me more than anything was this idea that I was treating patients who had HIV disease. And not unlike cancer at the time, the HIV medication, the treatments were really difficult for patients to take. So I said, somebody needs to do something about this, right? Somebody needs to produce better medications that are more easily tolerated for patients. And I kept saying this over and over until eventually I realized that somebody was me. So when I went over to the dark side, when I went over to the drug development, biotech, pharma side of things, the lesson that I learned was keep that focus. You may be the only person in the room who can really advocate for patients. They'll be great folks, so highly educated and very knowledgeable and very well-meaning that are around that table, but they have their different interests. The finance people want to talk about the money, the PK people want to talk about the drug concentration, the manufacturing folks want to talk about the things that manufacturing folks get excited about. The biostatisticians just want to talk about the data. Who's going to talk about the patient, right? Who's going to talk about how this will be integrated into real people's lives? And I sort of try to keep that thought in my mind all the time, in the back of my mind always. Okay, what does this look like for patients?
I think it gives you a unique perspective on things, and you hear the word patient centricity used a lot, and there's so much to unpack in all of that. The main thing a clinician's trying to do is treat their patient.
Make you better, exactly.
But of course, there's so many things that go into that, sort of how the drug is sort of like administered, especially things like liver cancer. Having to have like liver biopsies with huge great needles. Strangely enough, patients don't really enjoy that. And then how often it needs to be given, and the side effects and everything. So you have that unique perspective, which I think is really, really important. I wanted to move on to fundraising questions, and I'd like to thank my previous guest, who I asked to share a question, and I'll be doing the same thing with you for my next guest. So the question is: in very difficult economic and fundraising times like these, what is your advice to fellow CEOs on the actions that you should take to ensure that your company survives?
Wow. I think the most important lesson I've learned is just never give up, right? You have to be capital efficient. Money makes the world go round. All those, so all of those things are true. And focusing on the things that are going to bring you the most value and being ever so conscious of how you're spending all of your dollars. You have to be in charge. You have to be on top of those things. Being resilient, being willing to roll up your sleeves, go the extra mile, do the hard work. This is what I would suggest to any entrepreneur, any CEO, as they're embarking upon this journey, and particularly when this journey gets hard. There are definitely going to be valleys, but if you value this work ethic, if you value making sure that you know why you're doing, keep that why in focus, and never give up. Just keep plugging away.
Just to add to that, I think it's also a very lonely, or can be a very lonely role as a CEO, because you've kind of on your own. So I think, but there's obviously a lot of fellow CEOs that you can speak to. You have your boards as well.
It's a great question, Jeff. I can remember the transition from being a CMO, Chief Medical Officer, to becoming a CEO. Yeah. And I can remember all the times when, from that Chief Medical Officer spot, I felt like I knew it all. I was like, I understood it all, and I knew why I wanted to do everything, and I knew what the best way to get to the answers and get to the endpoints and value-creating milestones. I knew exactly what I needed to do. And I would bring that to the table, right, to the management team meetings, and I would feel very confident in that. And we'd go around the table, and everyone was sitting there, and they had their points of view and their opinions and the issues that were the priorities for them. And I'd watch my CEOs process all that information. And then when it was time to make decisions, sometimes my view, sort of carried the day and was most persuasive, and sometimes someone else made a more persuasive argument. And see, that wasn't the case when I was a physician in the clinic or a physician in the hospital. Sure, we had our multidisciplinary teams, right? We had nurses and pharmacists and respiratory therapists and PTs and social workers, etc., and all of their input was valuable and expressed when we were in our team meetings. But at the end of the day, MD stood for makes decisions. And the doctor was the one who sort of made the decisions. That's not so true in the biotech and pharma and drug development world. There are all these other pieces that go into the process. And one of the things that I've had to accept and understand in becoming a CEO is that the product is your patient, right? It's using that doctor mentality. The patient, when you were the physician, was, that person with the funny little gown that buckles in the back, right? Yeah. But when you're in drug development, you have to sort of balance that. Now, that product, it becomes like your baby. It's like your patient, and you need to do what's best for it so that it can grow up and do what's best for real patients, correct? So becoming a CEO, I've always had to sort of keep that in mind. And then now that, like you said, it's sort of lonely because you are getting the input and collaboration of lots of different professionals with their own particular perspectives and points of view. But at the end now, I'm the one making the decisions. And I'm sure a chief medical officer or a chief business officer or someone may get frustrated with me because I make a decision that doesn't go sort of in the direction that they would have gone from their perspective. But now You got to keep all these perspectives in mind. And I have new respect for my old CEOs when I was when I was sitting there rolling my eyes when they went some other direction than I would have them go.
Moving on to relationships and building relationships with investors, how do you approach building relationships with investors, and what's the most effective way to maintain those relationships over time?
Yeah, I'm still figuring that one out, Jeff. Investors are a different breed to me. I tend to put things in a certain sort of priority order, and usually the money piece is sort of way down on the list. Yeah. Investors are exactly the opposite. They're really looking at their returns. Yeah. They're really looking at, okay, if I put resources into this company, what can I really expect out of it and when? And so keeping that in mind helps you to build a relationship because you can recognize where that person is coming from. I think that's always key, is to understand what matters to the person that you're trying to build a relationship with, and then understand how you can relate to that and not take that sort of me-centric view into assuming that the world sort of revolves around you and that what you think is important is going to be what's de facto important to them. And then once you've got that, once you understand that, then you can modify your conversation to make sure that you keep it interesting to them. I've found that investors are, first of all, they're people. They put their pants on one leg at a time, and they have softball games that they have to get to with their kids, and they have all the same sorts of worries and so forth that we do. But they're doing a job, and that job requires them to take in a ton of information and see a lot of worthy things and then make judgment calls. And one of the things that I've found is that, people just don't write 7-figure checks to people they don't know. Yeah. So to your point, these relationships are really important, and becoming familiar will go a long way toward a successful fundraising campaign.
And that neatly leads into the next question, which is what types of investors, whether it's VCs, angels, institutional, etc., do you typically seek?
I see them all, actually. And I think it's fair enough to say that your angel investors tend to prioritize, I call it the 3 Ps, right? People, product, and the plan, right? And your angel investors tend to focus on the people that are at the company, who they are, what their background is, are they capable, are they experienced, those sorts of things. And then they look at the impact of whatever it is that they're going to invest in. And then they look at their return, a little further down the list. Whereas VCs are sort of more the opposite. They tend to look at the return and what's ultimately going to be their net on this exercise. And then they look at the product and how it fits into a market and so forth. And they have that, sort of certain lens to the way they do things. So I find that I tend to resonate more personally with the angel sort of impact type investor than I do with necessarily the VC, but I get it, and it's certainly, you certainly can't ignore it that this is important too. Finding that solution in this case to a huge unmet medical need like cancer makes me very passionate about what I do, and I try to communicate that passion to the investor and find something in him that where that connects, and then we can build our relationship. We can build our relationship from there.
Those types of funding, I think, are increasingly sort of important in the current sort of environment. And of course, there's that personal connection or relationship to whether it's a family office that has started investing into a particular disease because there's a family member that's been affected sort of like by that disease. So in one sense, they're slightly different reasons, but they're very motivated to sort of like find the cure for it. Can you describe a time when a fundraising effort didn't go as planned, and what lessons did you learn from that experience?
I just recently had a fundraising experience that didn't go as planned. I thought that I'd made an excellent presentation. I'd hit all my marks, and I'd been very concise, and I'd been very direct, and I was able to infuse enough, I believe, passion and emotion to the storytelling that things were going to be great. But unfortunately, the person that I was pitching, they weren't honest in what they had available to invest, and sort of where they were in their process of raising a fund. It gave me the wrong expectation as related to timelines that they would be able to invest. I really hate it when that happens, but the truth is that you're gonna kiss a lot of frogs before you find the prince, and that one was definitely a frog.
I'm sorry for that. Again, that neatly leads us into the next question. So what role does storytelling play in fundraising, and how do you effectively communicate your company's vision and mission to potential investors?
Well, our company's vision is a world where we don't fear cancer or its treatments. Getting back to this idea that we really want a therapy that is well tolerated and safe for patients to take in an otherwise paradigm of care that includes pretty difficult chemotherapy type medications, which people fear their side effects perhaps more than they do the cancer sometimes. Mm-hmm. So that's our vision. That's what we really want to communicate. We want people to sort of close their eyes and see that world, and then open their eyes and see our molecule and how it will fit into that, and it will check that box of safety and tolerability, but it'll also check the box of being able to be really hard on their cancer. So that's our story. And what's important is to make sure that you're able to connect that story to what your listener, investor, for instance, wants to hear. Now, I can't spend too much time on that part of the story to an investor without hurry up and get to the money slide, right? What's the market going to look like for this? And how do you plan on getting your product inserted into a market that may already have other offerings to treat the kind of cancer that you want to be able to treat? Everyone has ADD these days, right? So being able to really tell that story concisely, where you get an opportunity to sort of grab and get them interested, and then quickly get to the part of this story that you think is going to resonate the most with them. If you're talking to, your diligence team, you might focus on the medication and the medicine and the science behind it. But if you're talking to the CFO, well, then you really want to make sure that they understand that this is a huge opportunity.
As someone who's successfully raised large sums of money in the past, how do you manage investor expectations while balancing the long timelines often required in biotech?
Well, let me be clear. I've been on parts of teams that have raised really large sums of money, or large to me at least, sums of money in the past. And I've always enjoyed that opportunity to do that storytelling, to be the person who sort of conveys the value proposition of what we're doing and why we're so passionate about getting that product, making that product available to patients. I've never developed products for vanity or for enhancement. I've always tried to make sure that I was developing a product where I felt or sensed that there was this really huge unmet medical need, that there's patients whose lives were being shortened or caused to suffer unduly due to the burden of some disease. So I always wanted to be able to do something that was, truly meaningful. So the investor wants to make sure that we are maximizing two things: the shortening of the time that it's going to take us to get to the value creation or the commercialization or whatever the case may be, and that we're managing the money. If you make sure that your investor understands that you A, get that you B, prioritize that, and that you're transparent with how things are going in those directions, I think you'll be able to manage those expectations. I think you get into trouble when you try to, sort of skirt them, or worse, leave that out there and almost ghosting them to the one thing that they care the most about. So make sure that every conversation with your investors at some point circles around to how things are doing on the timeline, and how's the runway.
That neatly leads into the next question about the common mistakes early stage biotech companies make during fundraising, and how can they be avoided? I guess part of that is sort of the alignment of goals with the investors, so making sure that you're on the same page, so that you don't have difficult conversations. What some of the other common mistakes?
How long you got for this podcast, Jeff? Because I think I've probably encountered most all of these mistakes. If not, I'm sure I probably will. There is no roadmap for this. Each opportunity is going to be different because of the molecule, because of the market, because of the disease, because of the investor syndicate that you've been able to bring to the table, or the management team that you've been able to hire, or all the vendors that you'll eventually work with. You can group things, you can say that there's certain sort of cycles to things, but at the end of the day, each one of these is a very unique experience. And so you kind of have to keep that humility to understand that what I'm doing is not for the faint of heart. It's not easy. And that you're trying to do, you're always trying to give it your best. You're always trying to do the right thing. Have that sort of integrity. Don't make the mistake of judging yourself against every other biotech company or every other pharma CEO that's out there. They have their own unique journey. They've been able to manage that as best they could and made it to wherever they are. And you'll have to figure your pathway out as well. I would definitely say speak up. You mentioned being the CEO and being alone. That's true. A lot of those decisions are sort of on your head, but you don't have to be alone. You can seek out others who've maybe perhaps walked that road before, or others who can offer you advice and counsel and fellowship, so that you're able to understand that the answers are out there. You may not always know what to do, but if you look and you ask, you'll be able to find someone who can guide you in the right direction. And it's been my experience that, for the most part, people want to help. They like what you're doing for its value to humanity, and they really want to help and see you become successful. So, yeah, speak up.
I like that. I think two aspects: be curious. Ask questions. There's no such thing as inane questions.
If you don't know the answer, you might as well ask.
And then again, ask for help. I think particularly here in San Diego, there's a great biotech sort of like ecosystem, and there's just so many like tremendously experienced people that are here. So absolutely ask for help.
Yeah, this is one of the things I really like about doing what I'm doing in this startup world here in San Diego is the people do genuinely seem very helpful.
What strategies do you use to navigate investor skepticism, especially when presenting early stage or unproven technologies?
Well, the one thing I'm trying to learn not to do is to make sure that I don't roll my eyes. Because whenever you're developing something that is sufficiently new, you'll get someone that they know it's innovation, but they'll ask you about other things that work just like yours does, or other things that do what yours does, or they've never heard of this before. Well, gosh, that's why they call it innovation. You've never heard of it before. So sometimes it's difficult because investors in particular may have this idea of pattern recognition. They want to see something that's an incremental improvement over something that already exists. But when you're doing innovation, right, when you're doing really sufficiently innovative things, there may not be anything that you can compare it to. And that's really where the art of storytelling becomes super important. And, again, I'm from Texas, so I'm prone to tell long sort of country or rural type, simple stories, really blue collar type stories. And sometimes though, those can be very effective in helping someone who's trying to grapple with concepts, particularly scientific concepts, and they're not a scientist, that are difficult to understand because they don't have a context for them. So if you can pull from something simple that everyone understands, that can be very, very helpful.
It was one of my old mentors actually who basically said it shows how well you understand something because you should be able to explain it to your grandma. If that's kind of the litmus test as to whether you truly sort of like understand it. So if you can do that, I think you're doing well. How do you determine the right timing for a fundraising round, and what factors influence that decision?
I don't know that there's any time in the whole process that you're not actually fundraising, right? You're constantly trying to win the favor of those who have the resources to help you make it to your next milestone. Yeah. I think there are times when fundraising is in earnest, and there's times when fundraising is, optional. It's not the highest priority of what you're doing. But the idea that it ever really ends, I haven't seen that yet.
What role does the regulatory and clinical development path play in shaping your fundraising approach?
Well, there are really cool things that the Food and Drug Administration offer that can reduce your cost and perhaps your time as it relates to drug development, particularly when it comes to things like the timing. Getting a fast track review is huge. And I've been very fortunate that all the drugs that I've developed in the past had fast track status, which means that it cuts the review time basically in half. And of course, time is money, right? The FDA also offers other designations, like breakthrough therapy designation or orphan drug designation, that can also greatly reduce the time and expense as it relates to drug development. And on the commercial side, they can give you exclusivity in the case of orphan indication that helps to protect your market, particularly if your drug is long in the tooth as it relates to IP protection. So I think that the agency does offer some things that are very helpful and encouraging to drug development, but it's still a regulatory agency. So you still have to meet certain standards, certain hurdles that have to be overcome. And once again, you're trying to convince a group by definition that is skeptical because they're charged with protecting the safety of the food and drugs that go into all the people here in the country. I think that's an important balance, and we try to take advantage of all of the opportunities that are available to us because we develop drugs for huge unmet medical needs, because we develop drugs for patients with a disease that is a relative orphan indication, at least here in the U.S. And then, of course, taking advantage of anything the FDA offers you in terms of speeding up the review can really help a company like a startup.
How do you balance the need for capital with the potential dilution of equity when raising funds?
I try not to think about it, right? There's certain folks who are really protective of their equity. I tend to be relatively generous when it comes to that. Sure, there's benchmarks and you can look all those up. They're Googleable in terms of what you want to be able to offer, not only your employees that are helping you get there, but of course, the investors who are funding, sort of funding the process. So as a founder, I found that it's best to treat people like you would want to be treated. You keep that sort of golden rule in mind. You think about the value of what you're trying to do versus, what it's going to cost you to do that. And when I go into any sort of negotiation, I always try to keep in mind that, it's better to have 10% of a watermelon than a whole sunflower seed. What do you think the impact of what you're doing is going to be on the world? Let that also be a guide for you. Then you'll find your way to loosen up and allow this, allow the natural order in terms of it'll find its level. It'll find its level. Investors are going to want theirs, and that's okay. Employees are going to want to feel vested, and that's important as well. But getting there is the most important thing, and you've got to find a way to get over whatever ego you may have to make sure that you get to the end goal.
Again, it was a different mentor, but he always said to me when we were working together, people seem to be obsessed with the percentage equity and the ownership, and it's like, well, what would you rather have? 100% of nothing, or 5%, whatever the percentage of something. There's something huge. What are some key lessons you've learned about maintaining a strong relationship with investors, especially during difficult times or challenges?
I've learned that people like to hear the stories straight, and they like to hear the story, right? So nothing would make me more uncomfortable than being left in the dark. So I assume that is how others would also feel, that knowledge is probably better communicated than withheld. So it doesn't mean that you have to tell everything. It doesn't mean that you have to, go full or open kimono or whatever it's called with every investor. But at the same time, you do not want to have the board meeting be the first time you communicate something that was really significant that happened 2 months ago. You want to make sure that your investors are well informed. You'll get a feel for those who are going to want a little bit more deeper dive versus those who are much more superficial and just need the highlights. Make the effort to find out what it is they need to know and make sure that you tell them what they need to know. That will keep that relationship warm and honest, and that's all you really, want from it. You want to be able to have a conversation and know that both people on both sides are showing their cards.
People don't like surprises, understandably, and I think for those people that know me, is a phrase I always say, which is, we're successful together by sharing information. And I think often it's not necessarily even if it's bad news, the information itself, but it's also the timing of when that is shared. So I think that's really, really important.
Very important. I agree.
How do you handle investor questions or concern about risk, particularly in the biotech space where success is often uncertain?
Well, I always tell them that our project is really de-risked. And they don't always believe it, but I try, because I know that's a really big issue. And particularly, again, is if you are developing a product that is sufficiently innovative, there's always that risk of being the first in class, right? Best in class, that's fine. But first in class is always going to have its challenges relative to getting folks comfortable with what you're trying to do. So you try as best you can to build a logical story based on data with reasonable interpretations of that data. If you can do that, then folks will feel a lot better about their risk. If you can't do that, you can forget it, because it's innovative, and it's just too many other things out there that are me 2, me 3, me 4, me 5 that they could put their resources behind and feel much more comfortable about the overall risk of will this work or will this cause any particular side effects. So I see the question of risk as sort of essential to this whole drug development industry. Risk of losing your money, as well as the risk of this not working or giving some side effect that you didn't anticipate. That's one way that I think the AI can be very helpful at helping us de-risk. And obviously, just your experience, you can de-risk any number of aspects of the drug development process by making sure you've got the right people, making sure that you've got the right plan, and knowing your product very well based on all of the information that's been collected on it over a period of time. These are the things that really de-risk, and I try to communicate those to the skeptics.
While you were talking, I was just sort of like reflecting actually on a great Nature publication, I think dating back to about 2012, but it's still very, very relevant. I think it was Pfizer that did a post-phase 2 survival analysis from, I think, about 48 compounds. I think these were all small molecules. It's kind of known as the Pfizer 3 pillars publication. And so, of course, we'll get to the chase. But if you tick all 3 of those pillars, your chance of having a successfully marketed drug is that much higher. So the first one being, does the drug get to the target tissue where it's supposed to? The second one is, does it then bind, if that's the mechanism of action, does it then bind to the receptor? And of course, third, and to be fair, most difficult, can you then measure the pharmacological expression of that binding to that sort of like receptor? But again, if you tick all 3 of those pillars, then your chance of a successfully marketed drug is that much higher.
I couldn't agree more. All those are very, very important, and you will see a sigh of relief from any investor when you're able to at least address those before you start to deal with all the other potential issues in the drug development process.
Can you share your approach to negotiating terms with investors and how you ensure that the deal works in the best interest of both the company and the investors?
Well, that comes again back to this question of familiarity, right? How well do you know the investor? What's important to them? Yep. And being able to tell that story in a way that resonates with that investor, and that investor feels motivated to do whatever it is that you're asking that person to do, which is usually invest or reinvest. Being able to get to that place where they feel comfortable with the process, that they feel that it's been sufficiently de-risked, that all of their questions have been answered and they feel comfortable with those answers, even if the answer is, I don't know. And it's a process, but then you can start to kind of understand, what you might be able to agree upon relative to a value, the value of this investment. How much of your company are we going to get for a certain amount of money? And there's so many things that go into that. There's so many things that really go into that calculation. So it's really hard to sort of break it all down. But I use these guiding principles of what is the thing that they value? How can I show them that this opportunity, this product right now and I'm the right person to develop this product, and it'll meet that need that they have. And then my goodness, if we dream big, what's the return on that? If you can paint that picture very clearly, I think you've got it made.
What role does strategic networking play in fundraising, and how do you go about cultivating a network of potential investors or partners?
Preparation is to performance, as circulation is to luck. That means you got to get out there and network. If you want to have good luck, if you want good things to happen to you, then you're going to have to get to know a lot of people. And what'll happen, you'll see, and it's almost organic, is as you make those relationships, you'll have to talk about some of the things that you do, some of the things that are important to you. And you'll have to listen and find out what others do and what's important to them. And in those conversations, as you build those ties and those relationships and those networks, you'll start to figure out, if I've got this problem, I know someone who may be able to give me good advice or point me in the right direction, or may be able to solve that problem for you. And since there is no blueprint for what we're doing in drug development, no real sort of detailed blueprint to what we're doing, you're going to have to interact with a lot of people to get advice on things that you just don't have a clue on sort of how it works. That's why I feel like networking is essential in this industry. And it's also a lot of fun. I mean, I'm typically an introvert. I don't do well necessarily in really large rooms and large crowds, but on a one-on-one, I love it.
You surprised me with that, but looking back, what fundraising strategies or tactics have been the most successful for A28, and how have they contributed to the company's growth?
Well, I would say the tactic that we use that is probably the most fruitful is the warm email. When you can get a warm email to a potential investor, some go-between that sort of acts as intermediary and a liaison, and one that can sort of vouch for at least the general integrity of the person that's on the other end, and they can vouch for you, then that tactic works better than anything. It sort of still goes back to this idea that no one's going to write you a 7-figure check or an 8-figure check if they don't know you. So it's all part of that whole networking process. And if you can get a warm introduction, you're way ahead of the game. You know, cold outreaches, emails, etc. I don't know what the percentage of those that get returned, but I know it's very low for me, at least. And in this world where we're seeing AI and other tools being used to maximize all of that, it ends up going straight in the junk mail file or the spam folder for me. But when I get an email from someone that I know, and it's introducing me to someone that I don't know, that person that I don't know gets a tremendous amount of credibility based on how well I knew the introducer. And I'm usually willing to give that person the benefit of the doubt. I think that's true on the other side as well. When I'm fortunate enough to get a warm introduction to an investor or anyone, a vendor, anyone, that makes that relationship so much easier to play off. And then we can always, talk crap about the person that we know in common.
We're in a people industry, so it's all about those relationships.
Absolutely.
So as we wrap, is there any questions that you'd like me to ask that I didn't?
Ooh, that's a really good question. Well, no, there aren't any particular things that I wanted to say. I didn't come in with a certain agenda of things that I wanted to mention. But I do believe that when it comes to drug development, that I couldn't reiterate more how important it is that what drives me is very personal. And what drives me is the idea that I want to help patients. I do that by making sure that the drugs I produce are safe and well tolerated. I do that by sticking true to the other principles that I consider my North Stars, which is listening to nature. Yeah. It will give us clues, and making sure that we don't forget the simple solution as a viable way to look. I think I told you this story once before. My wife, she's very good at contextualizing things sometimes, and she says it reminds her of the safety briefing on an airplane when the flight attendant comes on and says, "Oh, in case of emergency, our path lighting will illuminate." And a change in color indicates that you've gotten to your exit. But keep in mind, the closest exit may be behind you. I think that's so true in drug development, is that we have become sort of obsessed with sexy science and this more and more complex ways of looking at biology and how we can intervene when it becomes pathology. And I think sometimes we sort of forget to look behind, that sometimes these more simple solutions can be better. And it has been my experience that they are.
Stan, thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. This has been really fun.
Innovating Tomorrow's Medicine with Dr. Jeff Trickett.